Margaret Briggs has had to wait more than 7 years, nearly 2,700 days, for her moment of truth.
All we have wanted was to understand how a vulnerable man who needed help could end up dead in police custody.
On the 4th of November 2013, her mentally troubled son Leon suffered a drug-induced psychotic episode on a high street. His behaviour was erratic, his actions unpredictable. He darted into an off-licence, and when he left, the 39-year-old father was detained by firearms officers under Section 136 of the Mental Health Act. The inquest heard how he was brought to the ground, then restrained, at times face down, for close to a quarter of an hour, just out of sight of CCTV. With his legs clamped and hands cuffed behind his back, Mr. Briggs was carried to a caged van, which conveyed him not to a hospital, but to Luton Police Station. On arrival, Mr. Briggs was still struggling, agitated and confused. Within minutes of being carried through the custody suite and again being placed face down, this time in a cell, Mr. Briggs was about to become yet another statistic for deaths in police custody. His mother has never been able to bring herself to watch what happened to her son, but she supported Channel 4 News in its legal challenge for release of the footage so others could view what happened.
Because I wanted the world to see how my son was treated.
She's had to rely on an inquest jury to comprehend these distressing pictures. They show him left on a cell floor in what was described at the inquest as a dangerous prone position, and his shouting replaced by silence, with his life fast ebbing away when the cell door swiped his feet as it closed. The calling of his name brought no response, yet the cell is not reopened for another 3 minutes. By then, it's too late. The jury's conclusions convey the shortcomings of a tragedy all 6 trained police officers maintained they tried everything to avoid. They found the primary cause of death was a combination of prone restraint, both on the street and in the cell, prolonged struggle, and amphetamine intoxication. Among the serious failures were inappropriate use of force and the failure to recognise the need for urgent medical attention in the cell. And finally, the jury's decision: neglect contributed to the death of Leon Briggs. His family had pushed for unlawful killing. They hoped this would be one of the first tests of a ruling by the Supreme Court late last year, which lowered the standard of proof in such inquests. It's no longer beyond reasonable doubt as in a criminal trial, but now on the balance of probabilities. They left today disappointed.
Not the kind of closure we wanted.
It's not the kind of closure we wanted.
Acting Sergeant Lawrence Short sectioned Mr. Briggs under the Mental Health Act, restrained him, then opted for police custody because Mr. Briggs, he said, was unmanageable. Experts told the inquest he should have been treated as a medical emergency, but wasn't. Not a single officer has faced a disciplinary panel over what they did or didn't do on that day and what happened inside Luton Police Station in 2013. Hours and hours of questioning by independent investigators was met by all officers with no comment. Each one of them said they were following legal advice. Their own force ultimately offered no evidence to a disciplinary panel a year ago.
I don't believe the officers have anything to apologise for. They went, they did their job, and they did it to the best of their capability that day.
But there was an apology today from the police force itself.
The family and friends of Leon Briggs have had to wait far too long to hear all the facts surrounding his death, and our thoughts are, of course, with them at this very difficult time. The jury has today identified a number of significant failings by the police which contributed to the death of Mr. Briggs. And for this, we are truly sorry.
Mrs. Briggs is well aware her son's death is not an isolated case. She's been on demonstrations with other families who have lost their sons in similar fashion. The death of Leon Briggs and new guidelines have had a major impact on mental health care locally. In Bedfordshire, Section 136 detainees have been taken into police custody only 3 times in the last 4 years. But among other forces in England and Wales, there's a more worrying picture, with police custody being used as a last resort nearly 2,000 times in the same period. The last 20 years is scarred with a list of men, mostly black, where restraint has triggered death. The organisation Inquest has sent an alarming report to the United Nations documenting these cases.
The excessive delays and obfuscation by the police, the lack of accountability and impunity, and the failure to address structural racism within our policing and other public bodies means that these deaths continue.
The Briggs family remain beset with anger. They believe the force has sought to obfuscate and blur the abject failures. And the coroner today said Leon Briggs had been so very let down by both police and ambulance services.